All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the kickoff reading for a new series, New Book News, celebrating writers whose books were published during the pandemic lockdown. My name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a literary arts nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. We have programs for writers, readers, and storytellers, including our upcoming Fall Literary Festival, September 24th to 26th, featuring Cynthia Atkins, Quincy Flowers, David Giffords, and Janet Wong. For more information, please visit lityoungstown.org. So it's the day after National Indie Bookstore Day, so I'm wearing my City Lights t-shirt, and we send out our thanks and admiration to the independent bookstores that are so critical in the literary landscape. Thank you so much for joining us. I was unable to get our live stream going on YouTube, so I know that you're watching this as a recorded feature, and thank you so much. We really appreciate your hanging out with us. And I'm very pleased to feature 3 writers today, and I congratulate them on the publication of their new books. And we'll follow the readings with a brief conversation. Our first reader is Mary Swan-Bell, a writer, content creator, and pathological overthinker with a penchant for coffee, musicals, and the sea. This is her first book, and you can find more of her writing at Adventures in Overthinking, Elephant Journal, and Medium. And Mary, welcome.
Thank you so much. I was trying to find a section to share with you that I thought would be the most impactful, and since this is a literary recording show, I chose my first chapter, which is about writing. So it's called Tell Your Story, Heal Your Soul. My mother was an English teacher for a few years before she became a full-time wife and mother. However, she embodied the Catholic school teacher archetype for the rest of her life. She corrected our speech from the moment we could say dada, and if my siblings and I share one common trait, it's excellent grammar. However, she was not particularly moved by those who used her beloved English language in a creative way. My brother, a playwright and author, wrote dark, moving pieces, the kind of things that kept you up at night and questioning everything about your life and family and choices. My mother would read these pieces, shrug, and with a sour expression say, I don't know why he can't write anything happy. Most writers write what they know, and we didn't always know happy. However, my mom did such a good job of painting a picture of the cheerful life she wanted that she wouldn't admit our actual life didn't really look like that picture. When I started writing, as a good little wanting acceptance and approval girl, I wrote happy, funny things. My mom loves a good joke, so my goal was to make people laugh. I rarely wrote about things that bothered me, but if I did, it was only with a funny spin on them. We would talk about my dad's abuse or losing his temper if it ended in a punchline. My freshman year in college, I read Annie Lamott's Bird by Bird, and it completely changed my course as a writer and a person. The title Bird by Bird comes from a story Annie tells about her teenage brother who was completely overwhelmed and frustrated by a report he'd been assigned to write on birds. Her dad calmly encouraged him not to be undone by the enormity of the report, but instead to take it bird by bird. Lamott encourages her writing students to share their unedited truth, their shitty first drafts. Her advice became my mantra. You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better. Over the next few years, I alienated quite a few people by sharing my unedited stories. From Lamott's wisdom in teaching, I learned to appreciate shitty first drafts and how important it is to just write it down, as she encourages aspiring or blocked writers. In fact, the advice I've heard repeated over and over from loads of successful authors and even a few divine interventions is simply write. Several years ago, I started writing a book about my family experiences, a memoir of sorts. Many days when I sat down to write, my fingers flew across the keys and words flowed out of me as if they were coming from a divine source. In fact, at the time, I was completely caught up in a church and believed they were coming from a divine source. I wrote and wrote and wrote. Sometimes when I reread what I had written, the words seemed foreign and I had no recollection of actually writing them. I was in a zone, and this solidified my belief that these words originated from a divine source. I told my story from childhood to the present bluntly and unabashedly. The writing was so poignant in some passages that it didn't seem possible it came from my own head. Painstakingly, I edited it and crafted a book proposal based on the advice of Linda Sievertson and Danielle Laporte's My Big Beautiful Book Plan. Crossing tasks off rapidly, I now had to find an agent and a publisher, and I would make my dreams come true. But then my computer tragically died, and the words that I hadn't thought to back up anywhere else were lost forever. I was completely devastated. Foolishly, I thought, it's 2015. I don't need to back it up anywhere. That shit doesn't happen anymore. In fact, that shit does still happen. It does, and it did. Losing the book that seemed like my purpose for so long left me defeated, let down, depressed, and feeling worthless. I believed that those words were the best I had to offer, and they were gone. So much work gone. So many words lost. As often as my MO, I immediately began drawing conclusions. The book wasn't meant to be published. I was only supposed to write that stuff to help me process it. No one was meant to read my words. The book would have been too hurtful to my family of origin if it was published. I wasn't supposed to be a writer. This is not my purpose after all. This was my pattern for years. Upon encountering an obstacle, I saw a sign and assumed that I'd misinterpreted my divine guidance and immediately turned around and headed in a different direction. When you're on the right path, things come easily and doors fly open for you, right? No, that hardly ever happens. A few years ago, upon hitting a roadblock and immediately deciding I'd misinterpreted the signs and was headed the wrong way, I got this bit of advice. Maybe it isn't a roadblock, maybe it's a detour. Maybe you're just supposed to move this obstacle and keep going. Motivational author and speaker Rachel Hollis inspires her loyal followers by saying, maybe you were given this mountain to show others it can be moved. I hadn't met her work yet, but this advice resonates deeply in me. So maybe I'm going the right way, and instead of finding a new goal, a new path, a new purpose, I actually need to go around this fallen tree or washed out bridge or broken computer and keep going. What a revelation. Looking back through my life, I saw a distinct pattern of times I'd interpreted hardships as signs that I was going on the wrong path, when that might not have been the case at all. Rather than question every decision I'd ever made in my life and getting stuck in a giant spin cycle of regret, I decided that from that point forward, I would break the pattern of going home when the going got tough. Initially, when it seemed like writing a book was a giant bust, I threw myself into my happy and fulfilling roles of mom, wife, daughter, caregiver, encourager, supporter, and friend. This is my purpose. This is more than enough. I took my usual route and hit the library to stock up on books to help me recharge my life, live with purpose, pursue a simple life, live with passion. I started doing yoga and meditating daily to clear my mind, improve my focus, and be a better, stronger version of myself. No book? Okay, I will run toward the next best thing, pathological self-improvement, full speed ahead. That doesn't work? Okay, well then I will try this. No? Okay, well I will do that. That's not working? Okay, then, and so on. I never seemed to really reach a goal because whenever I hit a stumbling block, I turned and walked or often ran in another direction. My husband and kids called me Sidetrack Sally, but during this transition, it became abundantly clear that this habit could be destructive. Through all my yoga, meditation, prayer, reading, and self-reflection, something tugged at my heart. Every book, TED Talk, and podcast reinforced the same message: write. Most writers will tell you that they don't necessarily choose to write, but I mostly thought that sounded like bullshit. Yet I find that I can't make sense of the world and my place in it without writing about it. I listened to the still small voice which patiently whispered, write. I drew diagrams and life summaries, realizing all the while what the answer would be, write. Finally, one night as I struggled to get comfortable in the 12 inches of space and half a sheet allowing my 8-year-old to share the bed with me had afforded me, I prayed, please help me be quiet and hear what you want to say to me, God. The answer resonated with thundering clarity, write. In fact, the clairaudience was so jarring and surreal that I jumped, waking my little girl and affording me a better sleeping spot, write. But I did write. I tried and was pretty convinced that the best writing I was capable of had been contained in the 39,000 words that were forever lost in cyber hell. But maybe those 39,000 words were a shitty first draft. Maybe they were 39,000 deeply personal and self-indulgent words that I had to slog through in order to write something more worthwhile. Well, worthwhile for anything other than my own therapy. Then there was this other thing. I've been writing the same story for more than 20 years in my head, in poems, in essays, and in blogs. If I don't write this story, then what the heck am I supposed to write? I've heard many different expressions of this same notion. We all only have one story to tell, and everything will just be the same, will be some different version, some varying aspect of the same core narrative. My core narrative was the dark memories impressed on me during my childhood and adolescence. I write to process pain and ultimately to heal the hurt. A few months after my dad died, I had a mental breakdown, and for months I struggled to get out of bed. My doctor diagnosed mild depression and perhaps a teensy bit of bipolar 2. So she prescribed an antidepressant and mood stabilizer. She assured me I wouldn't need it forever and promised it would help me get through this valley. I felt really good for about 3 months on this medication. My moods were stable for the first time in my life, and I was pretty happy. Actually, happy is a stretch. I was calm and even. I didn't have mood swings because I only experienced one mood. But during these 3 months, I didn't write one word, probably because I'm not really a calm, even person. In fact, I've always been kind of moody, but age afforded me the wisdom and ability to manage, work with, and ultimately embrace my mood swings. I'm very productive during my mildly manic episodes, and I write, cry, meditate, and read my way through dark places. Realizing this wasn't the right path for me, I took myself off the medication, which is ill-advised and I don't recommend, but I let myself be sad for a while and then I wrote about it. Through this process, some things became very clear. I don't write because I'm driven for publication, and being published doesn't make me more or less of a writer. I write from an inner drive to figure things out, to wrap my head around my feelings, and sometimes to heal my spirit. I don't usually write about happy stuff because I don't feel the need to process it. Instead, I ruminate on sad, hard things that muddle up my journey to the happily ever after. In fact, I feel a slight compulsion to write about sadness, lest it sneak up when I'm not paying attention and steal my joy. I like to keep the darkness out in front of me in order to keep an eye on it.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly Fordon is the author of an award-winning novel and stories, Garden for the Blind, a poetry collection, Goodbye, Toothless House, and I Have the Answer. She's a writer in residence for Inside Out Literary Arts in Detroit. Well, welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Mary. That was awesome. I'm going to read just the beginning of a short story from I Have the Answer. This is a story about the perfect neighbor and being a new and overwhelmed parent. Tell them I'm happy now. A week before I gave birth, the new people moved in across the street. It was midwinter. I watched from my window. A young woman about my age, early 30s, was standing on the front lawn in a long robin's egg blue parka. When she turned around, I noticed a baby wearing a matching blue ski cap hitched to her in a baby carrier, and a toddler in a red in a red one-piece snowsuit clinging to her leg. A third boy, maybe 6, was fashioning snowballs and firing them at the stop sign. The woman waved her arms around like a crossing guard, directing the moving men here and there. I didn't see a husband anywhere. A couple of days later, I waddled over with banana bread. I was overdue. I'd been off work for 2 weeks, and I was so bored I would have proffered communion wafers to the devil if he'd shown up for a chat. Banana bread was the only thing I knew how to make besides chocolate chip cookies. That morning I had made the chocolate chip cookie batter first, which in my estimation anyone would prefer to banana bread, but I'd eaten it all while I was waiting for the oven to preheat. The woman's name was Teresa. She invited me in for coffee. She was wearing short shorts and a midriff t-shirt even though it was frigid outside. Her stomach was as flat as a plate. She had the sleek, unmarked legs of a window display mannequin, and her thick blonde hair was parted in the middle and ran halfway down her back. Seeing her reminded me of all those years I had spent imitating Marcia Brady, wielding pom-poms while somersaulting and holding a hand up to shield my broken nose. They'd come from Denver, Teresa said. The weather was great there, but she wasn't a big fan of the prefab subdivisions. She was glad to be here in the Midwest in a real old-fashioned neighborhood with sidewalks and trees. I love old houses like this one, she said. I'm so excited to get to work on it. I wish I felt the same, I said. It tires me out just thinking about all the stuff we still have to do, the carpets, the kitchen, the plaster. She silenced me, swiping her hand through the air. Once you take the first step, it's much harder to stop than to keep 'em moving. She sounded just like my mother. Teresa's house was spotless. The two older children were watching television in the family room and didn't look away from it as we passed. They were so quiet I felt like I had entered the public library. This was one of my first impressions of life with kids, and it proved misleading. The living room reminded me of something I had seen somewhere. I couldn't put my finger on it. Even the area rug in the living room, a maroon and olive oriental, looked familiar. I love that rug, I said. Pottery Barn, she said, leading me into the kitchen. The whole house is Pottery Barn. I left all the old crap in Denver and went on a big spree when we bought this place. There was a beautiful floral arrangement on the mantle, flanked by silver candlestick holders and family photos. The only things on the kitchen counter were a cappuccino maker and a toaster. I'm sorry it's such a mess, she continued. I just feel like it's out of control sometimes, like I can't get a handle on it. She walked me over to the cappuccino maker and turned a dial. Do you like lattes? I can make you a decaf. Sure. I'd forgotten all about lattes. We were too broke for lattes. I'm having a double, she said. I was up all night painting my daughter Rachel's bathroom. The baby was sleeping in a car seat on the kitchen table. He looked fresh out of the pouch. I wasn't experienced enough with babies to guess his age, so I asked. 6 weeks, she said. She said his name was Nate. How do you paint with a baby? I had read that you should never leave a car seat or a bouncy seat on a table, so I stationed myself next to Nate with one hand on the rim of his seat. And when did you unpack? I did that the first night. She handed me a latte. She produced a thick, peaked whip. I can't stand boxes. Rachel's birthday is on Sunday, so she really wanted a Barbie bathroom, and I figured, what the heck? I'm up with the baby anyway. Why not paint? Geez, I said, it would really freak me out to start a project like that. After coffee, we went up to look at the bathroom. It looked exactly like my childhood Barbie bus, a pinkish purple hue I had never seen on any surface since. She'd actually recreated a life-size Barbie on the wall opposite the toilet, so that somewhat disconcertingly, Barbie appeared to be staring down at the facilities. Teresa explained that by employing a combing technique, she was able to create the illusion of wallpaper. I am very impressed, I said. Oh, it's not done. She pointed to the ceiling. I missed a couple of spots up there, and I still have to install the shelves. That night, I told my husband, Ed, that our new neighbor had already managed to paint her daughter's bathroom. She must be on something, he said. I climbed into bed and arranged the pillows to accommodate my large midsection. Nobody has that much energy, I said. It was 9 p.m. I could barely keep my eyes open. She's probably painting the kitchen tonight, I added. I got a defective model, he said. I glared at him. He grinned and I hit him with a pillow. I met Teresa's husband, Jim, 2 days later, the night before I gave birth to Christopher. We were sitting in the living room when he walked in. Teresa was drinking Merlot and I was nursing a Coke. He didn't look our way. He didn't look at the kids who were glued to Barney. He came in on tiptoe like a thief. He probably would have continued right past us down the hall to the kitchen if Teresa hadn't brought me to his attention. Our new neighbor, she called out, pointing to me. He walked over, still studying the ground, then offered me his hand without looking directly at me. I noticed that he was very good looking. In fact, he was the type of person who is so good looking it's hard to hear what they're saying. He had black hair, short in the back but long in the front, with bangs that hung like a drop cloth over his eyes. He may have spoken, but if he did, I was too mesmerized to notice. Go look at the bathroom, Teresa said to him. I'm pretty well finished. Now I'm thinking we should fix up the basement for the kids, like a castle. Take a peek down there, everything in miniature. You'll you'll be totally able to see it. In his abashed stance, he was still studying the carpet. He reminded me of that dopey actor, Keanu Reeves. Finally, he brushed his bangs aside and glanced briefly at Teresa. "Will do," he mumbled. Then he loped off toward the kitchen. After a week of sleepless, frantic motherhood, I looked out the kitchen window one morning and burst into tears. The trees were naked, the wind was howling, the houses lining the street looked like upturned coffins. The only thing I wanted was sleep. There were dishes in the sink and diapers on the counter. Even after I did the dishes, more appeared. It felt like I'd entered my own private horror film, an endlessly recurring nightmare. My grandmother always had dreams that my grandmother always had dreams that there was a lion chasing her. I couldn't relate to that at all, but I would have screamed aloud if someone made a movie about dishes that materialized out of thin air or laundry that proliferated unchecked. I spent a good portion of each day breastfeeding and crying in my bed. Then my mother showed up. Let me see my grandson," she squealed as she burst through the door. In her hip-length mink, she resembled a linebacker. When I held him up, she said, "What in the world is wrong with his face?" "Infant acne," I said. "The doctor said it would clear up in a week or two." She looked aghast. "He gets it from me," I added. "You never had acne." She shook off her pelt, and I hung it up in the hall closet. "Anyway, we have a new acne clear system at Mary Kay that'll fix him right up." My mother had been Mary Kay's top beauty consultant in Pittsburgh for 30 years and was now proud to call herself a director. "No, my hormones, Mom. Apparently he's expelling hormones." "Through his face?" She was fixing her hair in the mirror, lining the white blonde ends up like sides behind her ears. "So I'm told." "In that case, I'll hold off on pictures for a couple of days. Am I still sleeping in the basement?" The next day, I had just put Christopher down for a nap and was headed upstairs to join him when the doorbell rang. It was my mother-in-law, Mrs. White. When I opened the door, her voice hit me like a slap. I fought the urge to shush her. Since Christopher's birth, our house had become her own personal toll booth. She couldn't pass by without depositing something in our kitchen, but she always made it quite clear she was on her way somewhere else. She placed a pan on the counter and glanced at the full sink and the paper-strewn breakfast table. "I'm headed to Nîmes Market," she said. "They're having a great sale on my favorite La Crema Chardonnay." "Great," I said. "Just let me say hi to your mother before I go," she said, sweeping past me. In the living room, she shrieked, "Angela!" as if greeting a salesperson at the opposite end of Macy's, rather than my mother in the next room. I winced and listened for a cry from upstairs, but there was nothing. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Rachel Swearingen's most recent work has appeared in Vice, Kenyon Review, Off Assignment, and elsewhere. She is the recipient of the 2015 Missouri Review Prize in Fiction, a 2012 Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, and the 2011 Mississippi Review Prize in Fiction. She teaches at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Welcome, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks for that introduction. And it was great to hear both Mary and Callie's pieces. So this has been a lot of fun. I'm going to read from a short story that's in the middle of my collection called "The Only Thing Missing Was the Howling of Wolves." And I think the only thing you need to know is that it's about two adult siblings. It's in rural Wisconsin and also in rural Michigan. And the sister has had a lot of trouble in her life, and she's just kidnapped her grandson for the day to try to baptize him and brought him to her brother's house. How could my sister, crazy as they come, still coerce me into doing things that could come to no good? She had her 2-year-old grandson, Wendell, in her arms, and he was wearing a baptismal gown, and she was saying, "Just this once, Harlan, I got it all worked out. No one will ever know except me and you and the good Lord. You won't have to do a darn thing except drive." Lynette had lost her driver's license years ago, and one of her Narconon friends had dropped her and the kid off at my house in the country. There I was trying to install her borrowed car seat in my pickup so I could take her back home. She was like the wild mint in the garden I couldn't eradicate. It kept coming up, sucking the nourishment from everything I planted. Then she was handing me Wendell, installing that seat as if she were born to such things. We got into the truck and she said, "Can't you feel it? Them birds out there and that breeze, that's God, Harlan, that's God on our side." I pulled away as she stuck her head out the open window and let her newly dyed hair blow. In the back seat, Wendell laughed, and I had to look away from the rear view. In that lacy gown with his fine hair slicked to one side, his eyes too close together, I had to agree with Lynette that his name was a tragedy in the making. She refused to call him Wendell, preferring Scotty Boy instead. "How do you like me as a brunette, Harlan? You didn't even say nothing." For once, her face wasn't made up with 3 layers of paint. She wore a blue dress buttoned primly over her tattoos, not the usual tight shirt and shorts. And I remembered her at 17, pregnant and leaving home with nothing but a pillowcase stuffed with clothes. I was 14 then, and now here we were again, both of us, 46 years later, back in our hometown in Wisconsin. We passed a highway patrolman clocking traffic from his car, and she ducked out of sight. God had set the whole thing in motion, she had said. Ross's wife had called her in a moment of desperation, needing a sitter. We'd have just enough time to get the kid up to a chapel in the woods for a christening she had just that morning arranged, if only I would take her. "How'd you get the kid, Lynette?" The last time we talked, she told me Ross had stopped speaking to her. She sat up and pretended to notice the Watsons' hobby farm. Just last week, they'd purchased 2 emus. "Holy crap," she said. "What is that? Is that an ostrich?" I stopped in the middle of the road and she braced her hands on the dashboard and looked behind us. "I asked you how you got him." "From his daycare. What you think, that I kidnapped him?" She made her voice high and whiny and mimicked Wendell's daycare teacher. "You aren't on our list of approved caretakers. As a matter of fact, you're on our list of people who are not allowed to see Wendell, me, his own grandmother. Can you believe it? I sacrificed Harlan. I gave up Ross so he could live in that big house and never even think of me." We were just 2 miles from town. I started driving again slowly and strained my ears. I thought I heard sirens, and I pulled onto a tractor path that led into a cornfield so I could think. Wendell was strangely quiet, and Lynette noticed me watching him in the rear view. "I just gave him a little Benadryl," she said, "just to relax him. He won't be any trouble and we'll have him back in a jiffy." "Don't say another word, Lynette," I said. "I don't want to know anything else." By now the daycare had called Ross and Ross had called the cops. Soon someone would put 2 and 2 together and they'd be looking for me too. "Someday they're gonna write about me, Harlan. You could be part of history too, part of the Underground Railroad Baptism Railroad. They're everywhere. People just like me, only I'll be like the mother of the railroad." "You kidnapped him, Lynette. That's a felony." "Stupid daycare people. I would have never put Ross or Caleb there. I left them with people I knew," Lynette said. Ross had told me about some of the people Lynette left them with. Biker chicks high on speed, a senile neighbor, men she'd known only for a few days. She'd lived on a commune near Nashville. She had helped run a bar out in Wyoming. She had hitchhiked with her kids across the country, losing her youngest in an apartment fire in Eugene, Oregon, while she was out partying, then giving her son Ross to an aunt to raise back home. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you're making? I don't need this now, Lynette." Lynette turned in her seat and gave me a hard stare. "I ain't doing this for you, Harlan. I'm doing this for Scotty Boy." Her voice lowered and she shuddered as she talked about how the world was dying of spiritual decay because of our generation and how it was time for us to stick our necks out and take a stand. "Let me tell you about our generation," I wanted to say. "While you were swallowing tabs of acid and partying, I was on a gunboat dodging sniper fire from the banks of the Song-Kalan." She went on and on about birds that fell from the sky and dead fish that washed ashore, how we'd polluted and destroyed everything, all for the love of money. "Kids like Scotty are in for a world of hurt," she said, "because of us, Harlan." All that was left of her lipstick was an orange outline. Her mouth wouldn't stop moving. The wind blew the tall and browning corn. A flock of crows rose from the field. The weather, the scenery, everything was just a bit too sharp. I knew it from my time in the service and from years of trucking. Days like these were specially crafted for the worst kind of trouble. I didn't kidnap him, Harlan, Lynette said. Scotty was outside with his little friends and he came right up to me, just slipped right through the fence. I didn't do a thing except ask him if he wanted to meet our good Lord and be beloved and safe. And he said, okay, Gamma, okay. So I took him and we ran. He's 2 years old, I said. Pardon me, Harlan, but I happen to know a thing or two about 2-year-olds. I had a son once too, but his heart shut down and he only lived for a day. I was remarried then, living in Baltimore and starting college. My new wife and I came home from the hospital and one of the neighbors had hung a big blue welcome baby sign above our front door. For a long time, no one except my parents, my wife's parents, came to see us. My mother just sent a card saying it was God's will. Lynette, if she ever knew, never called or wrote. She had problems of her own by then. I quit school and started trucking, and before long my wife met someone else. I wish I could say that this had been the beginning of the bad streak, but as far back as I could remember, it had been there, persistent and unpredictable, just like Lynette. I backed down the path and was almost to the road when 2 squad cars roared by. Lynette clutched the fabric of her dress and looked out the back window. They'll ruin everything, she said. She reminded me of our mother then, her hands clenched, always looking up at the sky as if it were full of locusts. You just can't leave anyone alone, I said. You messed up Ross's life and now you want to fuck up Wendell's and mine too. Harlan, you better watch your language. She looked upward like God was listening. You can't see right no more and it ain't your fault. You got everything you need now. You got that house Carla just give to you, clean out of the blue, though you never did nothing for her. You got that plot out back to grow things in a truck and a tractor too. You got everything and I ain't never said a bad thing about it to you. The least you can do is help me with this one last thing. Then I'll leave you alone. I won't tell nobody anymore I'm your sister. I won't ever ask you for nothing, not ever again. I should have known she'd use my moving into my first wife's house against me. I'd married Carla right out of high school and divorced her as soon as I was out of the service. She never remarried, grew old like the rest of us, lost all her family over the years, and lived in the same ranch house her father bought for us on the other side of town. I stopped once to see her on a route west and we talked over coffee. She still kept our wedding picture in her china hutch. As I was leaving, she hugged me and told me she was glad I was getting to see the country. You did good, Harlan. Maybe you'll send me pictures of your babies when you have them, she said, and I broke down and cried and told her about my son, about his tiny fingernails, about his ears shaped just like mine, and she led me to the bedroom and I slept through the night and I lost my job because of it. Then years later, she willed me the house, out of the blue, as Lynette would say. By now, every officer in town was looking for us. There was probably an Amber Alert. I couldn't bear to look at Wendell. We'd had him for less than an hour and he was groggy and his hair was slick with sweat. He mumbled the beginning of the alphabet song, A-D-B-C, over and over, reversing the letters, making strange motions with his hands. Something was wrong with him, and I knew, despite what Lynette said, that his parents were right in taking him to therapy twice a week. Well, Lynette said, are you going to help us or not? She reminded me how she carted me everywhere in a wagon when I was young. I wasn't no bigger than you, she said. Mom had left again. You don't remember that, but I do. You took a can of tar from the shed and poured it all over the kitchen. I had to cut it out of your hair. I told Dad I did it. I considered driving straight into the corn or dropping her and the kid at a farmhouse, leaving town, never coming back. I could still see her just as she was back then, the police car parked in front of our house, her lying to her father, telling him she had been the one to make me steal the candy, the comic books, the records, and all the other things I couldn't keep my hands from taking and stuffing into my mouth or under my shirt. I stole and she slept with every boy in town. All through childhood, she had stood before our father, telling me with her eyes to let her do the talking. I hesitated too long. She put her hand on my arm. Can't you just do this one little thing? We'll take the side roads. They'll never find us. It's not like we're going to murder him or something. I told myself it didn't matter if we turned back now or later, as long as she didn't implicate me. I had nothing to do with this, I said. I know nothing about a baptism, nothing about daycare. As far as I know, we're just going for a drive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So I put us back on Gallery View so that we could have a conversation, and I've asked Mary to kick that off if she would please.
Okay, so I really, really enjoyed listening to both Kelly and Rachel. And I have to say, because I mostly just write nonfiction, I'm completely mesmerized by fiction writers. And so I wanted to ask the two of you, because I noticed in your stories, your characters are so rich and diverse. I just wanted to ask you, where do you get your ideas for your characters?
Kelly, do you want to go first?
If you want.
Please.
Oh, you want me to? Okay, I'll
Sure,
go first.
go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, I have 4 kids. So, I mean, a little piece of every story comes from real life, right? So the experience of having your first child is pretty, you know, it's world shaking a little bit, and you don't really know what's going on. And so I think that The Perfect Neighbor, you know, is also an amalgamation of a lot of different people. I mean, I did not feel like, I never thought I was going to have any kids, and then I have 4. And I'm so glad I did. I love them, and they're great people. But it was hard. It was a hard adjustment. I was an only child, so the whole thing threw me off. And I just thought about that time when everybody seems to be doing a better job than you are, and you don't feel sure of yourself, and nobody seems to be helping you the way you would like. So like I brought in mothers who were kind of like doing their own thing. Now that I'm older, I kind of understand that they were just having their own lives, you know. But at the time, you're like, can somebody here help me? Like, is there nobody on planet Earth who can help me through this? So I just wanted to explore that, and then I just sort of let The Perfect Neighbor do her own thing and followed that story from there. So what I like to do is just follow the story, and I love that part about fiction where it doesn't have to be as mundane as real life. You can take it in any direction. So.
And I think I'm a lot like Kelly as well, in that, you know, the stories come from all different sources and often inspired by some, I don't know, it's very mysterious, I think, how they come. And like the story that I just read, it started from a newspaper article about relatives that were taking their nephews and grandchildren and you know, coming up with excuses for taking them for the day and then baptizing them when their children didn't know. And so I thought about this, and I had a brother and a sister-in-law, both that had just had children and were like going through thinking about baptism and whether or not they were going to go through this. And so that's where that story came from. But it's often just for me a little bit of language, or like Kelly was saying, it's starting with something that I'm not sure what it is, and then you just follow it in and figure out as you go along, you know, and then if you're lucky, sometimes rich characters show up.
That's really interesting.
If you surprise yourself, I think that's the most fun about it. Or you know, the story surprises you. That's the real joy of fiction.
Yeah.
Great. So how do you know? Now let me ask you this too, because I've historically not been a fan of short stories, but I loved both of your collections, and I could just really, I mean, all of the characters, all of the stories really I really could resonate with them. So here's my question. How do you know when the story's done? Do you just have a sense of finality, or do you like I think that you would have to, especially with short stories, edit them within an inch of their life. Do you find that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I don't know about Kelly, but some of these stories have been through so many drafts that I lost count. And even sometimes, I mean, it still happens when I'm reading a story. I think, oh, maybe I could tweak this a little bit. But I think for me, there comes a point when it's time to let them go, and I need to move on to other things. And if I definitely have gone in the direction of over revising, where the life is suddenly gone out of a story. And so I'm still kind of always playing with that line, like being able to allow enough roughness in there, enough air in the stories that they breathe, or overdoing it and then just having suddenly things turn flat. But I don't know that it's that different than like the work that you're doing, Mary, and you're in your essays, because you also are bringing characters in. And so maybe after Kelly answers that question, maybe we could flip it back to you and ask the same thing.
Yeah, well, I would say basically what you said. I mean, you know, millions of drafts. It feels like at least 10, maybe 15 drafts of each story. Sometimes like years go by and I just don't feel like it's clicking at the end. And then I sort of get that sensation of I found it when I find the right ending. And it is true, there's a couple stories that I just sort of let go because I mean, not in this collection specifically, but where I'm like, this is the best I can do with this ending. But I get really excited when there's that moment where I'm like, this is the only ending. You know, this is what I've been waiting for.
Such a gift.
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead, Mary. I'm interested to hear your answer.
Well, I mean, the characters are all people in my life, so I didn't really have to do too. I mean, obviously it's all perspective. Like many people would see people differently. What I tried to explore is seeing that we can all be good and bad at the same time. Like there's so many instances in my book of how, when I talk about the different people in my life, how they were simultaneously seen one way by one person, another way by another person. And I think that just like trying to explore that idea that we can all have so many different sides and nobody's just good or bad. And as far as when I knew it was done, I think if I had to publish it, because I was never going to be done with it unless I did. I was just going to keep editing it and rewriting and adding and subtracting. And I needed, just for my own personal peace, to be done with it.
So I have a question. Since Rachel and Kelly are saying that their fiction turns on a nugget of truth, and Mary is recognizing that there are characters and there's a narrative arc, what do any of you think about these stories as the other genre? So Mary, would you think of fictionalizing some of the material that you're working with? And Kelly and Rachel, can you imagine an essay?
Does someone want to, because I haven't answered for one story in particular. So I wrote one story called The Devil's Proof in my collection, which was about a fictionalized high school sexual assault. And it was fictional. I mean, the circumstances surrounding it or whatever. But then, you know, probably a year ago, I wrote the nonfiction story of my own sexual assault, which was took place in high school too, and it was published in River Teeth this past year. So sometimes I feel like, and actually I've just taught a workshop on this, you know, how fiction is a way into the material sometimes when you can't face it head on. And that's kind of what I do sometimes with things that are bothering me, go to fiction first. And then if that doesn't prove to be enough of a catharsis, then move on to nonfiction. So that's just kind of how it works for me. But I mean, nonfiction, you have to be more brave.
Yeah, and I think that for me, fiction gets at a truth that nonfiction just can't get to for me, and it's sort of what Kelly is saying too. But I do get ideas for writing essays or doing you know, more sort of investigative journalism. I toy with, I'm always really bad with timing, and I think sometimes I think about becoming a journalist, which, you know, not a great time for that, but there are themes and things that I'd love to just go out and talk to people and research and get information. And I think it's less about writing about myself and wanting to be able to make space for research that you just can't usually get it into a lot of fiction. It can bog fiction down. So I don't know if that answers the question that you were asking, Karen. And Mary, for you, do you use, I think what Mary was saying, or Karen was saying, was that, you know, that you are actually having to almost fictionalize your characters in some case, the people that were actually in your life. So you were using fiction techniques, even though it's nonfiction.
Right. And I have tried, since I finished with this book, I've tried to write a little bit of fiction, and I have found that, I mean, when you're writing nonfiction, you have to stick to the story. I mean, you have to stick to what happened. But when you write fiction, you have the opportunity to kind of explore. People can do different things, that people can act in ways that they didn't act in real life. And you're able to sometimes fill in gaps in the story. And so I think that it can be kind of healing in a different way than not. I mean, obviously it was very therapeutic to write about a lot of things that happened to me in my life, but I think that in writing fiction, you can kind of come to a different kind of healing, because you can write into a person's story. Does that make sense? Like, I found, like, people that I didn't really know, like my dad, who's been dead since 2011. I didn't know all of the things in his story that led to him becoming the person that he was. But when you explore that in fiction, you can kind of, you know, make up your own things. Or, as Kelly said, you can kind of follow the story, which I think is amazing. And I'm just trying my hand for the first time at this. So it's really, I mean, I'm sure you guys already know all of this. I'm preaching to the choir with 2 fiction writers, but it's a really interesting journey.
Mary, I had a question for you about, because so much of your book is about kind of going back to your childhood and looking at your past, but also figuring out your own, liberating yourself and your own creativity. And now you've finished this process and you're starting a new one. I'm wondering where you're at and what questions you're asking in that area of your life, and just creativity, and how it looks differently to you now that the book is actually finished.
For a long time, it just kind of felt like a big sigh of relief. Like, okay, now I did this thing that I've been working on for all these years, and now I can do anything else. So I've just been kind of, especially during the pandemic, when I had a lot of time just with my computer, to be like, what do I want to write about today? Or do I want to write about anything? So it feels, I don't know, I kind of feel like a kid in a candy store. Like I've been married to this story for so long, and now it's like I'm free and I can write about anything I choose. I mean, do you guys feel like that? Do you feel like when you're finished with your stories, like, oh, like you loved those characters and you were so close to them, and then you kind of put them out into the world and you move on?
Yeah, but I actually wanted to follow up before we answer that. Can you, because I know people don't know what the trajectory of your book is. I mean, ours are short stories, so we can't tell about each one, but what's the trajectory of the whole book, just for people who are watching, Mary, because you just read the first chapter?
Well, I basically, it's not chronological, but it tells stories of different people who I met throughout my life, who helped me, I think, piece myself back together. So I wrote about the people and the experiences that helped me find the wholeness that I felt was missing.
I just wanted to make sure that people got that.
Thank you for asking that.
I have a question for Rachel, because I I don't know. I mean, all the stories struck me, but for some reason, I just, Boys on a Veranda was just really, really moving. And I just was curious about the origin of that story, and also how you found that one painting. Were you inspired by the painting? It's a painting by a Finnish artist.
So the way that story came about, it was a poet friend of mine named Beth Marzoni. We were talking about a book of poems by Mary Ruefle, and there was a poem in it that starts out with, I think the line is, I had the urge to eat postcards of famous paintings. And at the time I had been, just for an exercise for myself while I was in grad school, I would take paintings and use them as inspiration for short stories. And so I was already doing that. And I think somehow that painting, I must have glanced at it somewhere, and it just ended up in that story. But there was a character, another story that didn't make it into the collection, who does actually eat postcards. And then it ended up turning into three short stories. And that was one of them. It was the man living next door looking in. And I actually thought that was wonderful in your book as well. And this wasn't one of my questions for you, but it comes up now, is that you also have in many of your stories, even the one you just read, there's this sort of watchfulness of people that are nearby and not knowing.
Yeah.
Like you know them, but you don't know them. And so one of the questions I did have for you, this ties in, is that your title is so wonderful. And it, like, for me, it's like, you've got that great sense of humor that undercuts a lot of your stories, the heavier ones too. And so there's a sense of unknowing, and yet I have the answer for the title. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the title was totally facetious. I just was, especially in the last few years, you know how everybody's like, wherever you are on the political spectrum, everyone's like, I got the answer, like I know, and I'm not. So I just thought, okay, it would just be really funny to put that as the title, because in the book, everybody is trying to figure out how best to take care of other people, how to like be a good person, how to do the right thing. And no one has the answer, it's just, so it was just a little humorous, but it's, I don't know if it throws people off this year, because this has been such a terrible year in 2020, and then this book just kind of goes, I don't know if it would make you mad if you saw it, like, oh, well, screw you.
Well, it feels to me, I don't know about Mary and Karen, but for me, it just feels like it speaks so well to this moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, thank you.
And both of your covers are so beautiful. They're the most beautiful covers.
Thank you. I know mine was done by Alvin Fisher, the designer out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He does beautiful books. Who designed your covers?
You should hold yours up.
Oh,
so you can see.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And your publisher who's your publisher?
New American Press.
New American. Mine is made in Michigan, the Wayne State University Press, and the cover design was Laura Kleinstra, and the picture is Nergis Mustafa, and she's an artist from Texas.
Beautiful.
So
It's beautiful.
I wasn't involved in the cover. I think, were you involved in your cover, or?
I was lucky enough that I was able to be involved, and there were a couple of covers, and I was able to choose the one I liked. So yeah, I was really grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, I love what they came up with. I'm not a visual person, so I'm glad they came up with something. It's beautiful.
I think we have time for one more question.
What are you working on now? I mean, you said, Mary kind of said, but Rachel, what are you working on?
So I have a novel that I'm in the middle of revising, and then I've got another one that I started. And the one that I've been revising it forever, and we'll see what happens with it. And there's a new one that I'm much more excited about, because it's very simple in one point of view. And yeah, so I won't say too much more about it, because who knows if that'll work out, but that's what I'm working on. How about you?
And Mary, you did say you're still exploring or dabbling, right?
Yeah, I was kind of working on a little bit of fiction. No, you did. I did answer that. And what about you? What are you working on?
I'm doing the same. I mean, I've been working on a novel forever, and I feel like every time I fail at the novel, I write another short story or some poems. I don't know that the novel exists, but it's funny. I don't know which one of us said that line about, or who said the line about. Maybe it was from when you were reading, Mary, but I have a terrible memory, so I don't. But how there's that one, oh yes, it was you, that there's always one story that you're pursuing, and you know, that's your story or whatever. And I thought, oh my God, that's that novel. But novel that's never happened. Mary did it, but.
Well, I'm excited. I hope you get it done.
Thank you.
Just for your own peace of mind, if nothing else.
I mean, it sounded like you had a lot of peace of mind, so I would really love that.
Yeah.
So great.
Some for the whole room, please.
Well, brava, brava. Thank you all so very much. What a wonderful conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I wish you all much success. And I will post the links to where readers can buy these wonderful books. And I just thank you again.
Thank you so much.
We also have to mention that Karen has a new book of poetry that's going to be coming out before long. So Karen, maybe before we all close, you could tell the audience what the title of your new book is.
Oh, you're very kind. I appreciate that. So the Compost Reader will be coming out with Accents Publishing sometime in the near future. So
Excellent.
You'll see me jumping up and down on the chairs. It's writing. If you know, we're in these weird times, we can still find ways to celebrate that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.